The moon has been a faithful companion of the planet Earth for billions of years. While the Earth exerts a gravitational force on the moon due to its size, the moon also has an effect on the Earth. Now NASA officials are warning of a global catastrophe that will be caused by an event that will happen to the moon, a massive flood. What is happening on the moon? How will this cause an unprecedented flood on Earth, and how will it affect you? In this video, we dive into NASA's official warnings about this catastrophic flood. The Earth is presented with a faithful companion who accompanies it on its journey around the sun. This is the moon, the source of some lighting during the night. For many reasons, the moon is special to us. It is the closest celestial object to us and the only one that has been visited by humans. The moon has been close to Earth for billions of years, but there are different theories about how it was formed. The main theory is that an object of the approximate size of Mars collided with Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. The resulting damage, both from Earth and the impact, occurred to form the moon, which was initially in a state of meltdown. Within about 100 million years, most of the global magma ocean crystallized with less dense rocks and floated up and formed the lunar crust. With a radius of about 1,080 miles or 1,740 kilometers, the moon is less than a third of Earth's width. In other words, if Earth were the size of a nickel, the moon would be as big as a coffee bean. The moon is an average of 238,855 miles or 384,400 kilometers away, enough space to fit 30 planets the size of Earth. An interesting fact, but unknown about the moon, is that it is moving away from Earth. However, there is no need to fear that we are losing our only satellite because it is moving away at a speed of 1 inch per year. So, you will look at the night sky in your old age, and the moon will still come. Meanwhile, the largest of the moons of other planets has individual names, unlike the Earth's moon. This is because even Galileo Galilei discovered the 4 moons of Jupiter in 1610, and no one had the idea that other planets also had moons. In addition, the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth, even if both are spinning. This is because the moon spins at the same pace that it spins around the Earth. Scientists call this synchronous rotation. The moon has a dark side, which is the distant side, or hemisphere, that we never see from Earth. However, the term is misleading, since, as the moon orbits the Earth, different parts receive sunlight or darkness at different times. In fact, when people talk about the moon phases, this is the cause. While the Earth takes about 365 days to circumnavigate the Sun, the Moon makes a complete orbit around the Earth in 27 days and spins in that same amount of time. But, as the Earth moves while also spinning, it seems to us that the Moon orbits the Earth every 29 days. That's why these things, in fact, are not as some say. And what is the Moon made of? It has a nucleus, a mantle, and a crust. However, compared to other terrestrial bodies, the core of the Moon is small. This solid, iron-rich core has only 149 miles, or 240 kilometers, of radius. It is surrounded by a liquid iron shell that is 56 miles, or 90 kilometers, thick. There is a partially melted layer, with a thickness of 93 miles, or 150 kilometers, covering the iron core. The mantle of the Moon extends from the top of the partially melted layer to the bottom of the crust. This mantle probably contains minerals such as olivine and pyroxene, which are composed of magnesium, iron, silicon, and oxygen atoms. The crust is about 43 miles or 70 kilometers thick in the hemisphere near the Moon and 93 miles or 150 kilometers on the far side. It is made of oxygen, silicon, magnesium, iron, calcium, and aluminum, with small amounts of titanium, uranium, thorium, potassium, and hydrogen. The Moon may seem calm, but a long time ago it had active volcanoes. They are all dormant today and do not break for millions of years. How is the surface of the Moon? Thanks to the probes and missions, we know how the topography of the Moon is and why it is like this. Unlike the Earth, the atmosphere of the Moon is very scattered and cannot prevent objects from hitting it. Therefore, the Moon is subject to a constant barrage of asteroids, meteoroids, and comets. The collision leaves countless craters behind. For example, the Psycho crater is 52 miles or 85 kilometers wide. Over billions of years, these impacts have caused the surface of the Moon in fragments that go from huge rocks to dust. Almost the entire Moon is covered by a pile of coal-gray debris, dust, and rocky debris called lunar regolith. The regolith is actually the nightmare of the astronauts of the moon while it is loaded and enters everything, the sojando. Below is a region of rock ruptured, called mega-regolith. Scientists call the light areas of the moon planidia. Dark features known as Maria are formed from numerous impacts and were filled with lava between 4.2 and 1.2 billion years ago. These light and dark areas are rocks of different compositions and ages. The researchers use it to determine how the initial crust can have crystallized from an ocean of lunar magma. Today you find objects made by a man on the moon. These contain pieces of equipment, American flags, and even a camera left by the astronauts. And you've seen images of astronauts walking on the moon. You must have wondered why they seem to jump. This will happen to you when you are in a place with less gravity than the Earth. The gravity on the moon is only about a sixth of the Earth. How about surviving on the moon? Even with the most sophisticated devices, you will have to be very resistant to stay long-term on the satellite. The temperature on the moon reaches about 260 degrees Fahrenheit or 127 degrees Celsius when in the sun. Remember, the atmosphere cannot protect you from the sun's hardness. At the other end, when it gets dark, the temperature can drop to about 280 degrees negative or 173 degrees negative. When you need a glass of water on the moon, you may have to go through several arches. Although it is true that water on the moon does not exist in a way you can swallow quickly. Interestingly, the discovery of water on the moon is quite recent, that is, a few decades ago, you could be dying of thirst without knowing there was water nearby. The first final discovery of water on the moon was made in 2008 by the Indian mission Chandrayaan-1. It detected the presence of hydroxyl molecules through the lunar surface, but they are concentrated in the poles. Other missions, such as Lunar Prospector, (LPROS), and Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, showed that the surface of the moon has global hydration. In total, 12 people walked on the moon, all NASA astronauts. While the moon is small compared to the Earth and trapped by the gravity of the Earth, the moon has powerful effects on the planet. One of the effects is that NASA is warning that it will cause global flooding. Many things happening around you are due to the sun, even if you do not know that. In fact, if the moon disappeared from its position, the Earth would change instantly so radically that maybe we would not recognize our planet as home. Animals would miss the moon a lot. See, for example, the crustaceans so low in the food chain, these creatures that are always moving depending on the moon to navigate. Even the smallest calculation error is disastrous, as you would see them dry on the beach, eaten by predators, or taken to the sea. You could have seen the mass of corals in the Great Coral Barrier. And a surprise for you, it is triggered by the moon. The corals are decimated according to several factors, including temperature, salinity, and food availability. But this always occurs between October and December and soon after the full moon. Before we continue, kindly contribute to the growth of this channel by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. On land, the Old Man of the Ester in Africa uses the moon's polarization pattern and the way it spreads through the atmosphere to navigate in a straight line. Without the moon, they would only move in circles and could not go home. The most common and observable effect of the moon on Earth is the tides. You get the tides as the moon and the sun pull on Earth. In fact, the oceans of Earth facing the moon rise in response to the lunar gravitational force and, as you may have guessed, form a high tide. But what does this mean? That due to the gravitational attraction on the sides close and distant from Earth, at the same time, there is also a high tide on the farthest side of the moon. As the ocean is liquid, between these two high tides, there are two low tides too. And as the Earth rotates, these high and low tides move through the globe for 24 hours. Just like any coastal location, it will experience two high tides and two low tides every day. Tides are very important for marine life. There is an area known as the intertidal zone, or between tides, where many species thrive. If this area becomes smaller or narrower due to weaker tides, the animals simply die. For humans, this means longer and more difficult fishing times. Popular aquatic sports will also suffer. And you guessed right, surfing will suffer if something happens to the moon. The tides that come push more water to the beach, forming larger waves. All these things can sound very far away, but NASA scientists, together with the University of Hawaii team, discovered that we are about to witness the disturbing effects of the moon in real time. And this is thanks to the change in the position of the moon. They call it the moon oscillation. And what exactly is happening to the moon? It seems that the moon is more mysterious than we thought. The satellite Astuto has ways to surprise us. While the moon seems to move in circles and ovals, there is another factor in its rotation and revolution. And this could cause great problems for all of us. We are already seeing the effects of climate change, while the ocean and sea levels continue to rise. However, it is about to get even worse for coastal cities. Of course, scientists know about the moon's oscillation for centuries, but the possible effects are only facing us. NASA is particularly concerned about how the effect of the moon's oscillation would exacerbate the climate problems that the Earth is facing. As we said before, high tides are caused by the force of the moon's gravity on Earth while the planet rotates, making two tides appear every day. The moon also rotates around the Earth approximately once a month in an orbit that is a little inclined. If we want to be more precise, the orbital plane of the moon around the Earth is about 5 degrees of inclination relative to the Earth's orbital plane around the Sun. Due to this, the orbit of the moon seems to float over time. It completes a total cycle, the nodal cycle, every 18.6 years. However, at certain points along the cycle, the gravitational attraction of the moon occurs at such an angle that it drags one of the two high tides of the day a little higher, while the second comes a little lower. So far you may have noticed that the moon is not necessarily oscillating in itself. In addition, the moon is still pulling on the Earth with the usual force. Of course, even before the effect of the moon's oscillation is known, scientists expected a significantly higher flood. But when obtaining their predictions about these tides, researchers have to work with a lot of noisy data, because they have to deal with complex climatic patterns, astronomical events, and variations of regional tides. The moon's oscillation is now part of the data they have to connect to their simulations. NASA scientists say that the moon's oscillation will improve the sea's effective level. They are saying that all the US coasts are at risk of dramatically higher floods, to the extent that we go deeper into this decade. We can have a moment of rest while the moon has not yet entered its cycle of amplification of the tide. The higher seas, which are amplified by the lunar cycle, will cause a jump in the number of floods in almost all continental coasts of the United States and even in Hawaii and Guam. Only the northern coasts, including Alaska, will be spared for a while because land areas are rising due to long-term geological processes. And what will be the gravity of this flood? You may be able to remember some devastating floods of recent times, but NASA says that the moon's oscillation will make the number of flooding incidents triple or quadruple. It's a scary future. In 2019, as a baseline, where scientists predicted 600 floods, it is difficult to quantify the effects of the increase in floods that NASA is expecting. The low areas are the ones that are most at risk due to the increase in floods, but this will only get worse over time. Using models, researchers have been able to describe how these floods will be. Some of these floods can occur in groups, which means they can last more than a month. Depending on the position of the moon, sun, and earth, cities can experience flooding on consecutive days or every 2 days. Researchers have discovered these ruptures, observing 89 points of the tide in all states and coastal territories of the United States, excluding Alaska. They created a new statistical structure that mapped the scenarios of sea level rise commonly used and flood lines. The number of times these lines were exceedingly annual, astronomical cycles, and statistical representations of other processes, such as El Niño events, which are known for affecting the tides. They produced projections for the decade of 2080. They are continuing the study and are planning to update the flooding tool in the future. Having such frequent floods can result in heavy economic damage. Imagine a city being flooded 10 or 15 times a month. Companies cannot continue operating when their stations are underwater. People lose their jobs because they cannot get to work. There will be health crises due to the infiltrating of water sewers. This is before accounting for the damage to critical infrastructures, such as water supply, energy generation, communication equipment, etc. Farmers can also lose all their crops and animals when submerged in water, which will lead to food insecurity. In short, only the United States can be looking at trillions of dollars in losses. These floods are different from the common floods of high tide, which can reach about 2 meters deep and are called uncomfortable floods because they are more uncomfortable than a calamity. NASA expects the release of its discoveries to help these cities and at risk of taking measures to avoid excessive damage. It is important that they start preparing now for flooding that can last a decade once they start. The rise in sea level has already made life on the coast risky. Some experts say that this may have played a role in the catastrophic collapse of a condominium building in Surfside, Florida. However, the effects of the moon's oscillation will be felt all over the world. In the United Kingdom, for example, low areas in Scotland with rivers and with nearby coasts are among those frequently prone to floods. And recent perspectives from the organization Climate Central say that many coastal areas of the United Kingdom, including parts in Falkirk, Fife, and Glasgow, as well as English areas such as Greens by Hull and Southport, can be below water level by 2050. Scientists are waiting for the moon's oscillation to amplify the floods in these places. Let's hear your thoughts on the NASA flood warning in the comments section below.